I was talking about loot boxes with my brother the other day, particularly about Netherlands recently having ruled 4 games they investigated with loot boxes as illegal. And at one point he said something along the lines of, say what you want about the European Union, but when it comes to consumer protection issues, once they latch onto something in unison, they are serious and relentless in their pursuit. That right there really struck me because that's when I realized how unstoppable the loot box controversy snowball has become. Netherlands became the first country to legally deem that certain types of loot boxes are gambling, specifically those that allow players to cash out in-game items. While gambling itself isn't illegal in the country, you need a gambling license to partake, and because the game publishers in question don't have such licenses and didn't follow proper procedures to implement gambling-like features, their games were deemed illegal. So they were given a couple weeks to either change their loot box systems or face fines and sales bans. Netherlands Gaming Commission didn't disclose which 4 games they specifically went after, but I'm assuming that CSGO, PUBG, and similar games that allow players to sell in-game items for real currency were among those that were heavily scrutinized. In their statement, Netherlands also noted that it wasn't just their country who were looking into the matter of loot boxes. Apparently, many countries across all of Europe are coming together to conduct their own investigation as well. Which brings us to today, April 25th, 2018, the day that Belgium has joined the fray by declaring loot boxes as unlawful. The following information comes from an official press release by Belgium's Minister of Justice, Koen Geens. The whole statement was originally in Dutch, but Google Translate does seem to do a pretty good job with the translation, so I'll be using that for the purposes of this video. The press release begins with the following excerpt. At the request of the Minister of Justice, Koen Geens, the Gaming Commission conducted a thorough investigation into loot boxes in video games. Players can buy a loot box against payment, which can give them an advantage in the game without knowing their contents in advance. The Gaming Commission now judges that this is at least 3 video games in violation of the gambling legislation. An interview with the sector is imminent. It is often children who come into contact with such systems, and we cannot allow that, says Minister of Justice Geens. Then, after talking about how Star Wars Battlefront 2 sparked the fire that became the loot box controversy wildfire, the statement notes how 4 popular video games were investigated: Star Wars Battlefront 2, Overwatch, FIFA 18, and Counter-Strike Global Offensive. Factors they considered when determining whether the monetization systems in these games are predatory or not include the following: emotional profit forecast. Uncertainty loot box is linked to profit forecast. A player may think that the purchase of a loot box has an advantage, which is not always the case. Confusion of fiction and reality. Well-known real persons promote the most expensive loot boxes. Use your own coin system. For a real amount, players can buy in-game coins. Apparently infinite methods to deposit money on player accounts. And finally, hide from the random generator or at least its opacity. With all this in mind, Belgium's Gaming Commission ruled that of the 4 games they investigated, 3 of them were subject to Belgian gaming law: FIFA 18, Overwatch, and CSGO. The only reason Battlefront 2 wasn't ruled as such was because it recently overhauled its monetization system so that in-game purchases no longer involve an element of chance. But had it kept the old system, it would have surely been subject to Belgian gaming law as well. The press release then proceeded with the following statement. Although the system of loot boxes in the 3 other video games can be seen as a game of chance, there is always lack of protection for the players. The fact that it is often minor players is worrying. The hidden character of gambling is extra problematic in the case of children. If this is not properly arranged, games of chance in video games will cause great damage to people, family, and society. Now here's where shit gets real. When talking about the consequences of violating Belgium's gaming legislation, here's what they had to say. The games with paid loot boxes as currently offered in our country are therefore in violation of the gaming legislation and can be dealt with under criminal law. The loot boxes must therefore also be removed. If that does not happen, the operators risk a prison sentence of up to 5 years and a fine of up to 800,000 euros. When minors are involved, those punishments can be doubled. First of all, Belgium isn't asking for the loot box systems to be tweaked to be less insidious, they are asking for their complete removal. Secondly, up until now, we have seen countries fine game companies whose loot box systems don't abide by gambling regulations, but this is the first time I've seen a country go as far as threatening imprisonment. I thought Netherlands was going all out, but Belgium is taking things a step further in tackling this issue head on. I freaking love it. The press release then finally concluded by quoting closing statements from Minister of Justice Koen Jeans and Director of Gaming Commission Peter Naessens. Koen Jeans had this to say: "Mixing games and gaming, especially at a young age, is dangerous for mental health. We have already taken numerous measures to protect both minors and adults against the influence of, among other things, gambling advertising. That is why we must also ensure that children and adults are not confronted with games of chance when they're looking for fun in a video game." As for Peter Naessens, here's what he had to say. "Paying loot boxes are not an innocent part of video games that present themselves as games of skill. Players are tempted and misled, and none of the protective measures for gambling is applied. Now that it is clear that children and vulnerable people in particular are exposed to them unprotected, game manufacturers, but also parties such as FIFA, for example, are called upon to call a halt to this practice." Now, on top of Belgium calling for the complete removal of loot boxes and threatening imprisonment for violators, what makes their ruling particularly significant is the games that they're going after. For the first time, we are seeing games like Overwatch, whose loot boxes are confined to cosmetic-only items, being pursued for its practices. Some people have taken to using the cosmetic-only excuse to defend Overwatch's monetization system, with Blizzard's CEO himself having gone on record to say that he doesn't believe Overwatch belongs in the loot box controversy and conversation. But the fact of the matter is that you're still paying for a chance to obtain something of potential value. You may not be able to cash out, skins may not have a direct impact on competition, but if it's something you want and you have to spin the slot machine for it, then that right there is gambling. It's one thing for Overwatch to allow players to make direct purchases of these skins, but the fact that you have to roll the dice for them is what makes the system egregious. Yes, it is not nearly as bad as loot box systems in many other games, but less bad doesn't mean good. It doesn't matter whether you're a little drunk or a lot drunk while driving. After a certain threshold, you're still drinking and driving. Which is why I, for one, could not be happier that Belgium recognized this and are taking steps to ensure that all forms of loot boxes receive the level of scrutiny that they warrant. This means that no form of loot boxes is really safe from oversight, which I think is how it should be. Arguably, an even bigger deal than Belgium going after Overwatch is them going after FIFA. It is no secret that FIFA is EA's true flagship title, with its Ultimate Team game mode and its card packs alone making them hundreds of millions of dollars a year. It was only a year ago that Ultimate Team across EA's various sports titles made them $800 million, which is around a fourth of EA's total annual revenue. So Belgium cracking down on EA's Achilles heel and demanding that the publisher remove FIFA's RNG card pack system will make a huge dent on EA's profit margins, especially once the rest of the European Union gets involved. And keep in mind that Europe is one of FIFA's biggest markets, with soccer, nay, football, being such a popular sport in the continent. If EA cannot sell their FIFA slot machines in Europe, their revenue potential will plummet and crash, plain and simple. But perhaps the most important development of all is the precedent that this all sets for the rest of the world to follow. More and more countries are being proactive about battling unregulated, glorified gambling systems in games, and that's only bound to make even more countries follow suit. In turn, game publishers and developers will be forced to give up on this notion of including loot boxes in all their games, unless they want to risk facing fines, sales bans, and now even imprisonment. That's a big win for consumers, especially for gamers who are sick and tired of seeing potentially great games being ruined by avarice. And the hope is that as loot boxes die down, we'll see the gaming industry focus on selling games on the merit of quality, not on psychological manipulation and scummy monetization schemes. I'm optimistic though. It honestly feels like time is running out for widespread implementation of loot boxes. It truly does feel like victory is in sight, even if it will take some time to get there. Which is why it is so important that now more than ever, we continue to remain vigilant and we continue to fan the flames of this conversation. With that, I would like to end this news update. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoy my content, consider supporting me on Patreon. It is completely optional, but donating even as little as $1 a month will go a long way in helping maintain this channel. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.